this talk is basically it's aimed to show some of the material that we've got here at the archives that you can use to research family and local history, but it's primarily aimed at some of the lesser known records, a few of that never thought of that, and some of the ones in the deepest darkest depths of the office that even we actually forget about from time to time. So it's I've done it in an A to Z thing quite simply because that's the only way I tried to get it in my head how to do it. So we'll start off with basically alehouse licensing records. So this began actually in 1551, but the schemes used to license alehouses has changed over the years. This is also the effect of the survival, so that in Gloucestershire at least quite a few, only few records exist. Usually you can find them in the county quarter sessions records, but there are also some in the Gloucester City quarter sessions records, and basically these are quite accessible, but they've not too much information on them. And again, a couple of lovely pictures from the newspaper at the bottom there, and from this is a pub at Bisley, going through at the new camp. Petty sessions records also have some, and they took over after 1872, but these again split into different districts, so they can be awkward to find. And we always say, if you're looking for some of these, probably the easiest way is drop us an email and we can have a look and see what we have, whether it will work for you or not. Apprenticeship records. So obviously most skilled tradesmen in the past earned their skills through apprenticeships. Typically these began ages of 10 to 14. Some went a bit earlier than that, and they lasted typically for 7 years or until the apprentice was 21. And as part of this apprenticeship, the master of the apprentice would house, feed and train the apprentice, for which they would receive a payment from the child's parent. And the idea was at the end of the apprenticeship, the apprentice would have the skills required for the trade, although not always the tools. It's a case in point that many apprentices ended up actually purchasing the business from the master when the master decided to retire. Some apprenticeships were arranged by parish overseers. These were usually for orphans or children of paupers, and the apprenticeships themselves were drawn up under what they call indentures. These were legal documents which contained all the details of the apprenticeship, the terms, the cost, the length of it, and it was agreement between the master and parents of the guardians or the actual child. And they can give a reasonable amount of information about the family of the child. So if you are doing family history and you realise, well, somebody's got an apprenticeship, it's also worth checking to see if there are any apprenticeship records surviving. So they, for example, survived for the City of Gloucester Corporation. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Hang on a second. Previous, there we go. From 1595 to about 1834. Tewkesbury's got some as well, and they generally look like this. They'll give you the apprentice's name, the master's name, the residence, the trade, how much money was involved, and whether that money came from charity. Because a lot of the charity records are to do with farming out these kids to give them apprentices, so the the parish doesn't have to pay for them. So I had a quick look yesterday, so the new slide. We've got about 8,000 records that include the word business in the title, probably more than that, because I did a very quick search. No, it wasn't that accurate, I don't think. But they range from huge firms like the Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, seen here in the bottom. These are the works off the Bristol Road there, with their lovely little shunt to Siam and some new carriages, new coal wagons on the sort of left and some new railway carriages on the right coming out of the factory, down to small private concerns. Like this is an image of the Kale family of Quedgley, who were basket makers. Usually we get the big records, we get lots of those. We don't tend to get so many of the smaller ones, probably a lot of the time because the actual people in these businesses don't think their records are worth saving, which is a crying shame, because these are some of the records we'd really like to get our pads on, to be honest. We recently come across this one, really. This is a lovely photograph. This is from James Cypher and Sons, who are exotic nurseries in Cheltenham. And they sent orchids primarily all around the world. And look at this picture here. You can see some of them are going to Tokyo in Japan. So, they had to get these delicate, fragile plants shipped around the actual globe, and again, all from a little place in Cheltenham off sort of Queen's Road. Great, it's a great story. We're doing a lot of work on this one to try and find out a bit more about it. Certain things we have, these are some very, very rarely used. The calendar of state papers, domestic, and the patent rolls. They basically relate to information on all aspects of early government, including social and economic affairs, law and order, religious policy, letters, musters, reports, all sorts of things in there. Next door to them, we have what they call the patent rolls, the Rotuli Litterum Patentium. I think that's right. I'm not very good at Latin. My Latin comes from Asterix cartoons. And these are administrative records from the King's Chancery, run from the 1201 to the present day. And again, these are very rarely looked at, but they can be useful on occasion to find out what was going on. Certainly, the patent rolls, they are very good because they record the sovereign's will on a wide range of matters, from official positions, lands, commissions, privileges, both granted to commissions, corporations, and individuals. So again, they can be quite useful if your search takes you that way. Canals. So obviously Gloucestershire had several canals. Records of many of the canal companies have survived, and they are vast archives. They have plans, minute books, tonnage registers, financial and management records, as well as sort of plans as well. So they are, again, any of the canals you're interested in, we've probably got records for them, and they make a great contribution to the archive as a whole. Among these are the canal boat registers, and there are two types of these. Firstly, there are the early ones, the Registry of Boats 1795. And this was simply because at this time, the government was worried about the French invading, and they realised that if they had lots of troops up north, how could they get them down south quickly? So they realised at this time the quickest way of doing that was via canals and rivers. So they basically had this Registry of Boats, so they had a pool of boats to call on if needed. These are sort of entries here. This is what they're like. They're single sheet entries, give you a little bit of information about the master and the number of men on board, where the canal vessel usually traded from. And again, it was just a backstop in case there was an invasion, they could call on them. But again, this comes out so very rarely. But you know, if you've got a boat owner working on the canals, it might be worth a look to see if he's on these. This was followed up by the Canal Boats Act 1877, and this was ordered to all canal boats where families lived on them, so those that were used as dwellings, had to be registered. It was an attempt to firstly improve the conditions of people on the canal systems and working on the boats. Also, it's a classic Victorian case of, oh, we don't like the thought of these young ladies sleeping with men on canal boats, even if they are their family, so it's a moral thing. But another aspect was to try and bring the children of the canal people into the education system. So they knew that, for example, a boat registered at Gloucester was at Gloucester once every 2 or 3 weeks for a week. They could get the kids into education. So very good. They are pro forma mostly, but as you can see from this one here, the red writing on the right hand side, often there are little notes on this. So again, if you've got somebody in your family or you're researching one of the canal boats, these registers are well worth a look. Looking back at the coroner, so the coroner office really early, 1194 it began, and it was the coroner's task with a jury of sort of 12 to 23 people to investigate any unexpected death, be it unknown cause, accident, suicide, or murder. Before the 1844 Coroners Act, there were 4 coroners who travelled around Gloucestershire and Tewkesbury. Except Gloucester and Tewkesbury, they had their own coroners, but these guys could go anywhere, so the records are really mixed up. What happened there? Sorry about that. There we go. Prior to this act, though, after this act, so they became down into areas, and they became much easier to search. Some of the writing is a little bit hazy, to say the least. This one from Fairford, 1880. You know, it's not very easy, but it records what happened in the actual jury and what was going on. The survival rate is also varied because some of these records were sent for salvage during World War II. So some of them you get great records. Stroud's a good one. Others not so much. But potentially you've got inquest papers, minutes of inquest, registers of death, and any correspondence of the like. But also, it's also worth looking, if you're looking into a coroner's case, a good source is the local newspapers, the Journal and the Citizen, and the Echo. They often have printed reports of inquests that went on. It's a sad fact that lots of these coroner's inquests make it into horrible history as stupid deaths. There are so many of them. You think, oh my God, what did you do that for? Here's one very sad one. Ada herself, she was scared to death by cows. She was a timid nature, and a herd of cows was driven through a street down in near Bristol. It basically scared her to death, and she died shortly afterwards. Here's one from a farmer. Farmers make up a lot of these, has to be said. They seem to like trying to kill themselves in silly ways. William Isles here, run over by his own mowing machine in Fairford in 1873. One of my favourites is George Browning. His finger caught in a mangel wurzel scratter, and essentially, like most things, he basically got blood poisoning and died as a result. Lots of them do have that. We have people who put billhooks into their own legs and everything, and people who hold on to pitchforks, people are stabbed by pitchforks. Again, they are very useful if you've got a death in your family and you don't know why it was, or it seems a bit odd. It's worth checking the coroner's records as well. So debtors, Mr. McCorber from David Copperfield, annual income £20, annual expenditure 19 and 6, result happiness. Annual income £20, annual expenditure £20, 0 and 6, result misery. Equally good, equally applicable today. If you did fall into debt in the past, you would often be ordered with a court-ordered judgment by the creditor, and if you didn't pay this, you'd be thrown into the debtor's jail until the debt was paid. So debtors' jail were not quite like the other jails around. These were usually large single rooms in town gatehouses or other jails. This is one from St Bravel's Castle from a local book. You get the idea, one big room where people were in. We know during the 1700s and 800s, around about 10 to 12,000 people were imprisoned each for debt each year. And aside from the Marshalsea one, which is where Dickens' family went to, we know that one. The most famous one was the Clink prison, which had a debtor's entrance in Stony Street. And basically, this gave rise to the famous slang terms, I'm in the clink and I'm stony broke. So again, there's some nice little social history comes along with these places. But the prison served by a debtor didn't alleviate their debt, and you typically, if you wanted to be released, you had to repay your creditor before you're released. When the Fleet prison closed in London in 1842, 2 debtors were found to have been there for over 30 years. And this is the page from my Gloucester Quarter Sessions debtor register, 1873. And again, it gives you the basic information you might find: the debtor's name, the date of admission, remarks, the plaintiff's name, why they're in prison, the sum, the term, remarks, etc. And interesting with this one, this is a random page I picked out, but I noticed if you see there on the top 3, the first 3 lines, the plaintiff here, Thomas Steele, was owed money. Not huge sums, but I wonder whether he was a moneylender potentially, and these people couldn't pay him back. So again, you can get interesting things like that appearing in these registers. So diaries, we've got lots and lots of diaries at the archives, and they're not always well used. Probably the best ones we have are Thomas Swift, who was a Churchdown schoolmaster. He kept a diary every day from when he became 18 to just 5 days before his death at the age of 73, and they are wonderfully detailed. All sorts of things he includes in here: what people had to eat, where they went to do various things, what he thought of local people. They are wonderful, has to be said. And then we have the other things here. So this is a page from a 1727 diary of a chap called Gabriel Le Pepre. He's London. He was a grenadier guardsman, and he basically, though he's a soldier, he had the life of a man about town, visiting clubs, plays, gambling, and meeting various ladies at various places. And again, we've got quite a nice run of those as well. And again, some of these are quite entertaining with the diaries. Our everybody's favourite elections and politicians. Lots of electoral leaflets, lots for national and local elections, supporting or denouncing candidates from various political parties. Most of these are what they call the local studies section, but also the local newspapers, the Journal, Citizen Echo, Tewkesbury Register, Stroud News and Journal. They always reported the results of elections, both national and local, many of which were challenged for fraud. It was quite a common thing. So yeah, and it really, you look at the elections and everything go on today, and today we're far more reserved than they were in the past about these things, and they can really get worked up and argue what's going on. And the other thing to remember is that the elections often took place over several days. So the results took longer to finalise, and they could take a while to appear in the press. So they generally printed out little leaflets saying what's the state of the poll at the moment. So you can see here, there's two here. Oh, excuse me. It just gives you an idea of the votes. And of course, voting was totally different from the past as well. We also had broadsides, so they have songs for people of cheer one side or the other. And of course, just like today, politicians make excellent satire. And again, I love this one, Harlequin Jack. It's the black art jumping down his own throat. Do like the overdose of the blue pill as well, because it reminds me of the Matrix, the red pill and the blue pill. But again, lots of these different things, different pamphlets and leaflets. If you're interested in seeing how ancestors voted, it might be worth looking at your poll book. So these are actually lists of voters' names recording the candidates who they voted for. This example comes from Ewley and Dursley in the 1780 general election, which was narrowly won by Lord North's Tories against the Liberal Whigs. But prior to the induction of the secret ballot, electors had to attend elections in person and verbally state their vote. Noisy, boisterous, unruly hustings. It must have been an absolute nightmare. And from the late 17th century onwards, these votes are increasingly a matter of public record. So again, there are lots of records of these. After the General Great Reform Act of 1832, things calmed down. And I always include this Blackadder quote: "We hear so much about rotten boroughs." Blackadder noted, "Denny on the Wold, a tuppenny halfpenny place of half an acre of sodden marshland with an empty town hall on it, population 3 rather mangy cows, a dachshund named Colin, and a small head in its late 40s and 1 voter." And in that one, it returned something like 3,000 votes. Well, it was not far from the truth. Old Sarum in Wiltshire was an uninhabited hill, which until 1832 actually elected 2 members of Parliament. So post 1832, the county clerk had to make lists of those eligible to vote by parish every year, though eligibility, of course, at this time was based on property ownership or tenancy. It had to be of a certain value. So we hold the electoral registers from 1832 up to modern times, though some are actually retained by local relevant councils. So again, if you're looking at these, it's always worth the check. It's also worth remembering the enfranchisement system changed over time, bringing more voters into the system. And some of these votes, they're arranged by alphabet, some are by street. They can be difficult to search. Quick look at evacuees. So Operation Pied Piper in 1939, some 3 million children moved out of Britain's cities. Very often they went back soon afterwards in the Phoney War. But many were placed with families in rural areas. They attended local schools. The county council kept lists of evacuated children who attended the schools. Some of these are closed, has to be said. This one was open, or it's been open for long enough that we can actually use it. But they give dates of when the pupils started school, when they left, where they came from, and sort of, eventually what happened to them. Some evacuations also, remember, were involved arranged privately, so you might not appear in the official records. And there are 3 main waves of evacuees. The first one, September 39, the Blitz ones in 1940, October, and then the Gyro in 1944, the V1 and V2 attacks caused a lot of evacuation as well. So again, they're going quite worth. If you've got somebody who's come from outside or something disappears, it might be worth checking the evacuee records. Farms and farmers, wide variety of records this covers, all of which can be used to find information about farms or the farmers. So basically a quick run through here: maps, tithe maps, the 1910 Finance Act maps, Ordnance Survey maps. Then you've got personal, family and estate records, such as family diaries, letters, commonplace books and photographs. Probate records, these are very useful, can show what happened to farms after deaths, while inventories can record livestock, farm equipment and household goods. And then you've got the parish registers. These are full of records of farmers and ag labs going in and being baptized, buried and also married. So again, don't forget all these things can be used, and they're not always well looked at, to be fair. Bit about fishing. So you've got privileged engines, which are the big basket weirs on the river, to float fishing on still waters or fly fishing on rivers. And again, we've got quite a lot of material relating to fishing. This top right here is a license for a privileged engine for a basket weir or oar. And what's good about these is they include a map of where the put your ranks were, as you can see here. Lots of photos of people fishing. This one, 2 guys fishing in Gloucester docks. You're not allowed to do that in the docks anymore. Sadly, you can down the canal, but the docks. And then we have some oddball ones. So this is a lovely one. This is this denture on the bottom left here. This is a lease for landing Bibury, but Bibury right next to the river there, with full of trout basically, and the rent for this land included 4 good fishing lines and 12 good fish hooks for taking trout. So obviously the guy leasing this land thought, I want to carry on fishing. I'll put a bit of this into my rent that's due to me. So floods and flood defences. So over the years, we're Gloucestershire. We've been flooded many, many times. The most famous ones were 47 or 63 and also 2007. The largest single collection we have is from the Gloucestershire Court of Sewers, which from the 1500s oversaw care and repair of drainage works along the Severn Estuary. This is an extract from Strengthening of a Channel at Berkeley. Has to be said, most of these tend to be sort of the eastern side, the river sort of thing. But again, the writing's quite bad. But there are a couple of very good books published recently. The Bristol and Gloucester Archaeological Association have published one of their record series on the flood defences, and again, it's well worth a look if you've got people living on there, because it does name a lot of names. Again, lots of our documents relate to the floods in more modern times. County council, district councils have drainage boards, so their records are available as well. But again, newspapers often provide the best details and images, and these are classic ones from the flood of 47 and 63. Recognised places in Gloucester, and these sort of the boats in the army that were called out. Again, some of these pictures are, like we all know from 2007, it can happen. It'll probably happen again at some point. Food, we've got hundreds of recipes in the archive. Some of these you'd love to eat, others must have needed nerves of steel and a bucket close to hand. So I've just got one of each. So this is a nice recipe. This uses a bone piece of mutton, which is older sheep, stewed gently in a well-seasoned gravy made from the bones. When it's half done, you put port into it, and then when it's almost done, you scalded the top of the meat with a salamander, which is basically a flat plate heated up. And basically you'd strain the gravy, and then you'd serve it with walnut ketchup, cayenne pepper, and anchovy essence. I bet it absolutely tastes lovely. You'd thicken the gravy with the roux, and you'd serve it. I mean, I'd love to eat that now. So it's almost lunchtime, isn't it? But of course, all our recipes are like that. This is calf's head hash. Clearly, there were some real food psychotics in the past, and popular food was calves' heads. We don't really look at it, even think about it now. I don't even know the dogs eat it, but this recipe is as vile as it sounds. Firstly, you boil the calf's head till it was tender. Then you'd split it in two. One half with the tongue was then stewed with gravy, white wine, salt, and nutmeg, and the mix thickened with the roux. And the other half was browned by the fire. Then the brain was diced, dipped in egg white, mace, and nutmeg, before being fried with bacon and force meat balls. Again, a mixture of ground meat, unmentionable things with fats and seasoning, flavouring. And at the very bottom, you garnish it with a slice of lemon. I don't think that's going to help that, is it? Yes, so we've got lots of these really odd recipes at times, I have to say. So the free miners, born in the 1300s under royal decree, any man over 21 in the 100 St Gravels who'd worked for a year and a day could become a free miner. They have the right to mine stone, iron, coal, anywhere within the 100 St Gravels. And to personally open a mine, you had to go to the deputy gaveler and apply to one. Most forest mines were drift mines worked by one or two miners, though there were some larger collieries, obviously deep collieries as they called, did exist. And the Deemed Forest Mines Act 1838 allowed the free miners to sell their gales, this is where they could dig, to other industrial miners, but also they had to keep a formal register of the free miners, and we've got those records here. So we've got the applications, gale books, register applications, gale rent ledgers, iron mine ledgers, some plans of coal and iron mines working as well. So it's a vast archive there. The little badge there from Eastern United Colliery. I used to live in the forest, and I was cleaning out a bottom shed once, and I got down to about 3 or 4 feet of coal dust, basically, and down at the bottom I found a miner's lamp carrier, and this was the number on it. So I've not been able to find the chap, sadly. So gamekeepers engaged by landowners basically to prevent poaching, rear game, control predators, etc., etc. From 1710 onwards, they had to be registered with the quarter sessions. From 1785, they had to have an annual license, and this is the license for Baron Sherborne's gamekeeper Edward Hall. One of the good things about this is that it was the gamekeeper didn't have to apply and write the license; the actual landlord did. So on the good plus side, they must have got a really sore hand because there's a lot of stuff to write, I would think. But licensing, primarily, like every sort of government license, was primarily to bring in revenue, but also it was thought to curb poaching, although really it was largely ineffective in this role. Most gamekeepers lived in tiny cottages on estates where they worked, had the power to apprehend trespassers, suspected poachers, and seize hunting paraphernalia and take these people to court. So again, there's a vast sort of amount of these gamekeepers licenses we have. So if you have somebody living in the country and you find you might have been a gamekeeper, it's worth looking at these records for them. So actually, prior to the Game Acts of 1784 and 85, no one could legally hunt game unless you had a freehold property with £100 PA or a leasehold worth 150 PA. That's a lot of money at that time. The Game Acts basically introduced licensing for anybody who wanted to hunt, for any dog, gun, net, or other engine for taking or destruction of games, like snares and traps, whether for sport or as gamekeepers. But again, you all had to register with the clerk of the peace, and on payment of a fee, you received a certificate. This is one for Thomas Escort of Shipton Moyne Estate, basically, and they're all pro forma like this. So again, these are another source of records if you've got a gamekeeper in your family. And anyone caught killing game without a license or refusing to show their certificate could be fined £50. So again, quite a high sum of that. So looking at graves, basically, so graves were essentially dug and tombstones erected by permission of the church and the diocese, but surprisingly, relatively few churches have burial plans, primarily because most of the burial plans were kept in the head of the church sexton. He knew where people were buried, and he tended to pass this on when he was getting too old. Of course, the trouble was when he died unexpectedly, that very often nobody would have a clue where the bodies were buried, especially as a lot of graves back then were unmarked, because again, like today, it's an expensive process. But you can find burials in the parish or church registers, and the Gloucester Family History Society have a great online memorial inscriptions index, so that's well worth looking at if you're doing your family history. And occasionally you get other things in these. This is a really lovely entry in the parish of Orr, say 133 for 1733, where basically William Hughes was buried on the 2nd of December 1733, and overnight his body was stolen out of the grave. And they knew who did it. It was Sam Steele, Thomas Salins, Richard Newman, and James Lane. We think these aren't classic body snatchers. We think William Hughes didn't want to be buried at all. I think that's the most likely. So these guys knew him buried, dug him up, and took him to where he wanted to be buried. But sadly, we'll never know for sure. So land tax, first introduced 1692. It was an assessment whereby the government gave each county a fixed sum to raise, and then the county had to sort it out between the administrative units, the hundreds, parishes, hamlets, and tithing. So it's quite complicated. The records are mostly held in the quarter sessions, and you normally give landowners the amount of tax for the land they owned. They can be useful, but they don't always give great information, and survivals before 1780 are quite rare, and even those ones afterwards can be quite patchy, but they are quite handy. If you've got somebody in a parish, it's worth checking to see if the land tax is there, just to see if this person is listed as owning a bit of property there. And from the sublime to the ridiculous almost. So before the start of World War II, the German Luftwaffe was making overflights to the UK for reconnaissance purposes. And they even got the UK public to pay for this by selling the aerial photographs. It wasn't twigged on by the government at the time, but of course, in the war, these maps were turned and photos were turned into target bombing maps. And we've got a nice collection of these for various places in Gloucestershire. This is just a quick little trum there, a little selection there. Cheltenham, you see on the left, the Trumpenlager, that's the GCHQ site. Dursley there in the middle, very, very small one. This shows the Lister site. And then you've got Sharpness Docks, which I was actually far more aware was never actually deliberately targeted in the war, although perhaps it should have been. Excuse me. So we've got some manorial records. The manor is a landed estate held by a feudal lord, basically, and consists of the lord's domain lands and lands on which he had the right to exercise certain privileges, so he could take fees, force people to work. Manors held manorial courts to preserve their rights and to regulate their tenants. And there are two types, the court baron and court leet. Court baron dealt with maintenance of property, tenancy, and other estate matters. The court's leet dealt with minor breaches of peace and public order and sat twice a year. And some created bylaws that still exist today. They can be quite useful, although the trouble is manors have their own names. So this is, for example, is the manor of Kingsholm, but a manor wasn't necessarily called by the name of its parish. They could be really strange ones. So if you're looking for see if any manorial records survive, the best thing to do is check out the Manorial Documents Register, the MDR, which is held at the National Archives, and that will tell you what survives, if anything does, and where you can see those records. One of the problems is prior to 1733, manorial documents were usually written in Latin, and also the handwriting could be quite poor, so they can be hard work to go through. But again, if you've got somebody you know they're on a manor, it's well worth trying to find out. A quick look at the militia. So this is the principal military reserve for England. They were raised repeatedly from Saxon times onwards, used for internal security duties and to defend against invasion. The 1757 Militia Act re-established militia regiments as the beginnings of what we'd now call the modern territorial army, primarily as a counter to the threat of French aggression. It's always the French, isn't it? Recruitment was by means of a conscription by which men were drawn by ballot from lists of able-bodied men that each parish had to draw up, though drawn men could delegate substitutes to serve in their place. So we've got some records of these. And if you're interested in this, so if you look on our website, we've got sources for military history, a hand list that covers every military record we have, and it's thoroughly worth looking at if you think you've got a militiaman or even other soldier or sailor or an airman. So when men were called up into the militias, there was a very real threat that their families could suffer hardship because their wages weren't coming in. So because of this, overseers of a parish could often give money to the families of enlisted men or surrogates' families and then claim it back from the county. And these are typical examples from Chipping Camden. Again, there's not a huge amount of information. It gives you the date, the person, and everything, and the amount claimed. So again, they can be quite useful. And again, if you've got somebody in the militia, it's well worth seeing if there are any of these surviving. They don't survive for everybody. Usually they're in the overseers' records. Sometimes they crop up in the church wardens or vestry accounts. So marriage licenses. So after Lord Hardwicke's Marriage Act of 1753, all marriages had to occur in a church. So couples either had to have bans published, these were announcements of intention to marry, or a license from the diocese before they could get married. To get a license, the bride and groom had to allege before a bishop or a surrogate that there was no lawful barrier or impediment to the marriage. This produced a document called an allegation and could be applied for up to the day before the wedding. So they were very popular for quick marriages, essentially. Anyone could apply for a license, but because there was a fee associated with them, they were more generally linked to the upper classes who could afford the fee. So there's a little bit of discrepancy here. So if you're fairly poor or lower down, you don't normally get them, but you get some. So they can provide useful biographical information, but the thing to remember is they didn't always take place. So sometimes you can get a license, but you won't find the marriage anywhere, and whoever it was basically forfeited their fee, basically, and they just let it go and didn't get married. So there is a little bit of a caveat to using them. So newspapers. So the Gloucester Journal, our earliest newspaper, 1722. It's a weekly paper published on a Saturday and covered everything you'd expect. News, mainly home and international, official notices, stocks, bankruptcies, markets, births, marriages and deaths, corn prices, royal news, politics, crime and police, and other local news. As you can see, basically, they were huge things. They're often like 3 foot by 2 foot, and it's really tiny type. So, you really often do need a magnifying glass to read them. But one of the beauties is that they got loads and loads of adverts for all sorts of things: medicines, to let notices, sales of livestock, property sales, auctions. They are fantastic things. The other thing to remember is that the journal actually had quite a large circulation area, far greater than newspapers of today and in the last sort of 40 years. The journal itself was sold in Worcestershire, Berkshire, Carmarthenshire, and Wiltshire. So it must have made profit in these areas to sell, as they wouldn't have done it. But they are great things to look at. One of the issues with them is when you start looking for things on them, you basically go down what we call rabbit holes, and you can find yourself 3 hours later, you're still looking at page one because there's interesting adverts and things. But I'll let you find that out for yourselves. These can be accessed basically via uh, microfilm, which we have in the archives, or you could visit the Family History Society and use the British Newspaper Library, which has scanned all these, and it's very handy because you can search for them. It's an online search facility, whereas with the microfilms there isn't. One of the great things about the Gloucester Journal, however, is Mr. Dunn's indexes. He went through all the newspapers and basically made an index of them. So you can actually, the journal, you can actually index. Not brilliant. Basically, you look for a start book in the first volume, and it gives you a reference from A to F, and it gives you a number, and you go to that relevant folder, and you go to that, enter it up, and it tells you what date and what basic page of the paper it is, so you can find it. Again, it's very useful. Although it has been superseded by the British Newspaper Library search facility. I thought this one's a new one. It's sort of thing. Paleontology. We've got lots of records actually related to paleontology and Gloucestershire fossils, which is quite surprising. Lovely set of images here from a chap called John Jones of Gloucester, circa 1805, that should say. He was obviously a collector as he drew these three common county fossils that he had, all from the Jurassic. You've got the classic Clypeus plotti, which is a sea urchin, also known as the Chedworth bun or fairy loaf. The sea urchin Trigonia there, which is a triangular-shaped beastie, and then the Griffia on the right hand side, the devil's toenail, it's a marine oyster. We've all recognized these, so we have some really nice drawings of these, not a huge amount, but again, they're interesting. Parish records, briefly touched on them earlier, not just the registers. This is what is important. Don't realise they are registers, but there's a lot more behind it. So as well as the registers, we've got churchwarden and vestry accounts. These detail expenditure and income for parishes, overseers of the poor, which listing, the people of the parish they helped, parish charities, this sort of thing, surveyors of the highways, and there's much more. There really are a great set of records. If you've got somebody in a parish, don't just check the registers, look at the other things as well. They can be very, very useful. So the petty sessions, now known as the magistrates' courts, these dealt with minor criminal cases, licensing and civil matters. They're not as well used as perhaps they should be. Typically, crimes were drunken, disorderly ones, prostitution. This is from Cheltenham Petty Sessions Minute Book in 1834. But the records are quite well organised, and they are quite comprehensive. You've got summary jurisdiction and court registers, minute books, which are more detailed than the summary jurisdiction registers, registers of explosive stores. If you should find some, what was this? It might be an explosive store. Clubs, juvenile courts, domestic court registers, and alehouse licensing where they survive. They're arranged in 30 districts based largely on towns. So if you know your basically district, your town, you might be able to find some in there. Again, it's obviously only going to be real of use if you've got an ancestor who, shall we say, was a little bit left field of the law. But you never know. They can be quite handy. So plans of railways, roads and canals. So the main source of railway road canals are the quarter sessions as plans for schemes that involve public undertakings, get me teeth in today, involving capital investment from private sources had to be deposited with the quarter session. So this has given us a really good archive. We know them as the Q-rums, basically. And there are schemes from canals, horse or tram roads, docks, river canalisation, turnpike roads, water supply, town improvements, 7 ferries and bridges, steam railways, gas schemes, tramways, but other schemes were undertaken. The only drawback is some of these were actually published and deposited, and then the actual scheme wasn't carried out. But again, that can be quite useful if you're researching a road or railway or canal. You think, well, was this scheme carried out, or did they alter it? If so, why did they alter it? The only problem with them really is they are quite large and unwieldy, so often they're about sort of 3 foot wide by about 2 foot long, basically. And when they were first preserved, they were folded up. Also, the paper isn't the best, so they can be quite crumbly. So a lot of them are currently undergoing TLC with our conservation department. But again, if you're researching an area and you've got a canal or railway or road go through it, it's well worth having a look. Thing to be aware of, though, is as you can see from this picture here, all they're concerned about is where the road, railway, or canal went. Where did it go through? They don't care what's sort of like 20 foot the other side there. So they are literally just purposely built for the track of the canal, railway, road, etc. So we mentioned a bit about gamekeeping earlier, so I've got to mention a bit about poachers. So of all the reported crimes in a country parish, the most common was poaching. A battle of wits between the gamekeeper and the poacher, played out between the poachers who wanted to put food on the table and sell what they caught, and the hated landowner and their sort of gamekeeper enforcers who, as we know, were not well liked. If caught by gamekeepers or police, poachers were dealt with by what they called summary jurisdiction, where justices of the peace, either singly or with a colleague, could hear cases and hand down sentences. If you were found guilty, and let's face it, most of them were, you usually had fines. These are two such examples. These documents are they're quite well written, but they're not massive. So this one at the top, it is on the order of about sort of 1 foot 30 centimeters wide by about sort of 20 centimeters deep. So there's a lot of writing in there, and also again they're folded up. Very often they're strung together from the top left corner, so they can be awkward to look at and use. But this top one is Jacob Musto, a labourer, who's fined £5, 1829, for using a gin trap to kill a hare. That's quite a lot of money. And again, Giles Coates, a watchmaker, going equipped with a gun to kill pheasant. And again, there are lots of these. So if you've got somebody living in the countryside, you think you've got an inkling he might have been a poacher, it's always worth checking these rest lists to see if he might be there. Probate inventories, so from 1530 up to 1782, when someone died, their executor had to provide an inventory or list of the value of their deceased personal estate for the probate court to settle any financial disputes about the will. They are an absolute fantastic resource that can reveal a huge amount of information about lifestyle, social status, personality, and even relationships between various people in the family. They're often arranged room by room, and they list furniture, furnishings, clothing, cash, shares, debts owing or owed, crops, livestock, and equipment or tools of the trade. They didn't include property for a reason that I don't know why, but they can be brilliant and they can be nothing. They can be sort of real chalk and cheese. They can be fantastic, like this one. This is an inventory from a farmer at Twinning. Sometimes you'll get something saying like property comes to £12, and that's it. So it can be, it's always worth looking at them from though. Moving on to public rights of way, so the National Parks Access to the Countryside Act 1949, county councils had to compile maps of footpaths and bridleways, and there is quite a complicated procedure for doing this. So you would originally submit a proposal by parish councils to GCC, then they would raise objections to it. Anybody who wanted to object, then they would give out the provisional maps and schedules, then the appeals, and then there are the definitive maps and statements. These are held at Shire Hall. We've got the rest. And currently, these are being revised. There's a new project to undertake a modernisation of these records and make sure they are still properly sort of listed and identified. That's ongoing. I'm not sure what the timescale is for that now. It's been delayed a bit, I think, because suddenly the past government realised it was actually quite a lot of work. Riots. So riots were surprisingly far more common in the past than today, and they took place quite frequently. If there are sufficient concerns felt by authorities, then they would order the Riot Act to be read. And this, literally, an official would stand in front of the rioters and read this card aloud out. The name only been changed, so it was King or Queen, basically, in the name of the King. So, literally, you can imagine being in front of a riot, standing there trying to read this card. But once you've done that, if the rioters fail to disperse, then they could be dealt with accordingly, usually involving hefty amounts of violence. There was not really any comeback. If you you were there, the riot act had been read, you hadn't dispersed, it was your fault, basically. And we'd get some diary entries showing this. This is from John Osborne of Wotton Under Edge, and it records a riot, 1766, one of the food riots. This was caused by prices rising in corn, and there are a series of riots all over the country in this year, and he's recorded one that took place locally. In these cases, you do get resources of law and order. Troops are often called out, and again, in this example, it only subsided when food subsidies were introduced to reduce the cost of corn. So again, people were so much closer to the breadline and starvation back then than they are today. Yeah, lots of ones. This is another entry we have from White. It's a good one. It's from Auntie Prowse's diary, and the memoirs of Elizabeth Shark from the Lloyd Bacon. It details a trip to Bath that was halted by some rioters. And in this instance, while travelling in the vicinity of Cold Ashton down the south, the Prowse's family coach was stopped because basically there's a flour wagon in front of it. They've been stopped by rioters, and Elizabeth's father and two servants drew pistols and walked through the mob, threatening to fire at the first man who tried to stop them, and the crowd sort of opened up and let them go through, basically. But again, you can get some nice information of this. So one of the largest collections we have, but it has to be said, it's one of the least used, is local quarter sessions. The quarter sessions were local government and local justice rolled into one until the county councils were established in the 1880s and the Crown Courts took over courts in 71. Crown appointed justice of the peace, and they could exercise administrative powers and stand in order over roads, canals, prisons, police, licensing weights and measures, lunatic asylums, parish removals, and settlement, as well as criminal cases. These were cases that were too serious for the petty sessions, but less serious than the assize ones, which assize ones are usually murder. And the justice is set 4 times a year, hence quarter sessions at Epiphany, Easter, Midsummer, and Michaelmas, different locations in rotation. And apparently, when these sessions came to town, it was a major good party time, and they'd do a bit of business in the afternoon, then basically drink and eat for the rest of the day, and everybody seemed happy and drunk basically. But they are fascinating, really good records that we have. So a little bit less violent than the quarter sessions. The sales particulars, a great resource. We've got 4,000 collections in the archive that have the word sales particular in some description. One collection alone is almost 9,000 items, and they can be a fantastic resource looking for property or even for family history. And they relate to all sorts of property being sold, and also commodities like timber and cider, things like that, wine in the bottom right here. So again, if you know where somebody was and you've got a place, it's well worth looking to see if there is some sort of sales particular. Looking for, they would sell, although this one is massive estates and inns, they do individual houses as well. Again, well worth looking at. Quick look at shipping records. So we've got some really nice collections. Port of Gloucester crew list and agreements. These were given 6 monthly returns on each vessel, so twice a year. So had to fill it in with this, and then basically what would happen is that it's a listing of what happened, where the ship sailed from, what it was carrying. So they are great. I think we've got about 3,000 of these off the top of my head for various ships in the county. We've also got the Port of Gloucester registers of ships. So if ships were built in Gloucester or bought into Gloucester, there's information on them. So again, it doesn't give so much information on the crews, nothing like that, but gives you good details of the ship itself. Usually names of master, where the ship was built, when and where, if the registration was closed, and the eventual fate. In Gloucestershire, we've got lots of ships that are built in Gloucestershire and Shropshire, but other ships feature from other counties too. Some even come from abroad, but again, not used well. But if you've got a mariner in your family, it's well worth looking at these. And again, for shipping, one of the best things to do is the shipping intelligences in the newspapers. This is an entry in the Citizen, and it basically 17th to 24th of May 1839 lists ships coming from, and then beneath it there's ships where there's ships leaving to. So again, well worth it if you've got a mariner and you're trying to track where he went to and where he sailed from. Theatre programmes. One of our least well-known collections. We've got programs from the Playhouse, the Everyman, the Playhouse, Picturedrome, New Olympus, the King's Theatre, Science Theatre, Roses, lots of them, as well as those from various Amdram groups. We've also got programs for cinema, such as the ABC at Gloucester. And later in the year, we're going to be having, in August, our Saturday event in August will be Lights, Camera, Action, all about cinemas and this sort of entertainment. And so the preceding Secret Reveal talk, which I've yet to write, will be about it as well. So again, if you're interested in that aspect, look out for August, and late July would be good. So transportation bonds, so transportation of convicted felons, sentenced to various crimes, sent to obviously Majesty's plantations in America and then to Australia. Contractors were employed to transport them down to the port they were going, and they usually got a bounty, £5 a head for the managed justices, but they had to deposit a bond, usually £200, assured to say yes, we will take this person down there. And again, we've not got a massive collection of these, but there's about 100, I think. And again, they're really interesting reading. So again, so for example, this one on the left here, this is somebody agreeing to transport the undernamed 4 convicts, basically to where they're going to be transported to. So again, they can be very, very interesting, and you get lots of little information on them. Quick mention about trench newspapers in World War One. So obviously, when you're in the trenches in World War One, you didn't really get much news from home. So to raise morale, units began to do newspapers. The most famous one is the Wipers Times, but actually the very first one was the 5th Gloucester Gazette, and this is the cover of the very first one, published by the 5th Battalion of the Gloucesters, essentially. Wasn't just the soldiers, the airmen also did it. So this is the Renkham Gazette, produced by the RFC Air Base at Renkham in Gloucestershire. We got about 10 of these, not too many. Presumably it stopped because the squadron who was doing it at the time was posted overseas, sort of thing. But again, they can be quite interesting. There's lots of little ditties and lots of little sort of notes about it. Lots of rumours as well. They are quite funny to read. Turnpike trusts. So turnpike is a body set up by Acts of Parliament to collect road tolls and improve the roads. They were around from the 1600s, but became popular from the 1700s onwards. At its peak, over sort of 1,000 trusts managed 30,000 miles of road in England, 8,000 toll gates and sidebars. You'll often see these little toll bars or the houses linked to them on the side of the roads. In Gloucestershire, we had about 60 turnpike trusts covering the whole county. Not all have records that have survived, but many do, and these can include maps, minutes, and accounts. So again, worth looking at. If you know some local area, it's worth having a look to see, oh, where's he a turnpike runner or something. We've also, of course, got lots of photographs of old turnpike gate buildings, so they're around, and you can search for those on the catalogue. Vehicle licensing. So, scheme of giving motor vehicles began in 1903 in responsibility of the city and county councils. Each county given an index mark of 2 letters followed by numbers. Gloucestershire started with AD, DD, DF, and DG. Again, while these are mostly of interest given to car enthusiasts wanting to re-register their sort of restored vintage cars, their records are handy for other reasons. And this is the case in point. This is an ancestor of mine, third one down, William Putley of 19 Hinton Road, Gloucester. He had a comma petrol lorry that was painted green. So you can, if you think you've got somebody who's like a transportation person or lorry driver, it's always worth checking these just to see if there might be an entry for it. The only trouble is you've got to know pretty much what they were driving. This one I came across, somebody told me they'd come across it by chance, sort of thing. So it can be a bit tricky, but again, bear them in mind. The other thing we got a lot of that don't get very well used, although it has to be said they do tend to be concentrated in South Gloss, are the World War One field service postcards. So these were sent by soldiers away for sending a quick message without any censoring by their officers. And basically, if you see, it's a pro forma thing on the back, and you just strike out what was right and what was wrong, basically. And it does say if you put anything else on it, they'll destroy the card. So these were actually shipped home really, really quickly. They could get back within about 4 days. So if there'd been a news of a big battle going on, soldiers could send these back, and within 4 days, that their families would know that they were okay or they were in hospital, something like that. And again, the Royal Mail postal system, the Army postal system for World War One is well worth doing research on, because it's a fascinating thing, and they could ship so much material very, very quickly. Coming to the end, zoos. So, surprisingly, there was once a zoological fight in Cheltenham with rivals trying to open a zoo in the town. The two main concerns were the Cheltenham Zoological Society and the Gloucestershire Zoological Botanical and Horticultural Society. They fought each other over where to open it, how to open it, and they both schemes collapsed. At this point, Joseph Pitt, who owned the Pittville Pleasure Gardens and the Pittville Room, opened the Park Zoological Gardens, although they didn't last long, they closed. However, basically, on his death, these were taken over by the Cheltenham Council, and today they're run by a charitable trust. And there are still enclosures today at Pittville Park with cockatiels, parrots, canaries, peacocks, chickens, chipmunks, and rabbits, and swings and everything for the kids. So they are well worth looking at. They are. It's well worth going down there if you've not been there. It's a nice day out. It's coffee and ice creams and stuff. Um, and finally, I say I've been at the archives 25 years now, and I've seen most things that we hold and ventured into most of the deepest, darkest recesses, the most distant strong rooms. But until yesterday, I'd never seen these. So it just goes to show you that, after 25 years, I'm still learning about the archives. So just think how much you've got to learn about the archives. God knows what they are. I didn't have time to open them up. But there are quite a few records like this, sort of the unloved little collections that exist in the archives. But so finally, to round it up, I'll just make a note. Don't forget, we don't have a Saturday event on April, basically because it's sandwiched in between Easter. So we thought we're all too busy eating eggs to do anything about it. So the next Heritage Hub event will be called Make a Note on the 2nd of May. It's all about Gloucestershire's love of music and melody. There are some great talks. We've got performances from the Shepherd's Crook Folk Choir of Winchcombe. And again, as always, the family history is going to be on hand to do your sort of your family history of any wild sort of pop stars you might have. And on that note, Gemma, I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely fascinating as always. We do have a few questions for you. First of all, we have a question from Dot. Dot would like to know, do the apprenticeship records say which charity paid the fee, as Gloucestershire Society regularly paid them, set up in 1657, is still going strong, giving grants?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, usually they do, as far as I'm aware. They don't always, but very often they do, because these can be in the actual charity record. So, for example, if you're looking at a parish and there's a charity there, there might be apprentice registers from that parish, and therefore it's from this charity. Not always, but very often they are done there. But that's a charity. Some of these charities we don't realise they've been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, and the classic one is the Great Ormond Street, which Peter Pan profits go to it, sort of thing. So you'll be surprised at how many of these are still ongoing and everything. And then yours is a brilliant case in example.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Rob would like to know, regarding the coroner's papers being sent for salvage during the war, what does salvage mean in this instance?
Oh, essentially, they were taken away, pulped down, and used to make new bits of paper for printing all sorts of things. So instructions, for army records, that sort of stuff. So basically, it does mean repulped, just like when you send the paper away to your recycling today. That means they've been recycled, essentially. They there are blocks that disappear, but again, all the ones that are not there, they're well shown. So if you search them on their online catalogue for your area, you'll see the ones that are there and that are not there, basically. But yeah, all just recycling, essentially.
Brilliant. And then we have just a couple more questions. Debbie would like to know, can you access any of these online? Now, I'm not sure exactly which ones Debbie was referring to at this point, which documents. So perhaps you could just say something generally about how people can access stuff.
Yeah. So generally, as a rule, most of our material isn't available online. You can look at it on our online catalogue, but only gives you the catalogue entry and a physical description about what it is. Having said that, however, Ancestry, all our parish records on Ancestry, together with, I've got to get this right, we've got the jail registers up there, the electoral registers, wheels and inventories on Ancestry. So if you're not a member of Ancestry, don't panic, because any Gloucestershire County Council library has got access to Ancestry, or you can come into the archives and go to the Family History Resource Centre, and they've got access to it as well. So yeah, the bulk of our stuff isn't online. It's we always think about it, and it's the thing everybody says, "Oh, why don't you just put it all online?" It's the cost of scanning it and putting it online, which is prohibitive. It can be very expensive to scan these in a good quality. You don't, the last thing you want to do is zoom in close and you see it's terrible. Having mentioned that, the one thing I will say is if you're looking for a will or inventory on Ancestry, for some strange reason, when they filmed these, they filmed the microfiche copies, so they're not very good. So I always say have a look at the Ancestry ones first, and if you can't make head nor tail, we can still provide copies for you. We can scan them and send you copies. Of course, we have to charge for that, fortunately. But yeah, bear that in mind anyway.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as John said, the stuff that's up on Ancestry, yes, you can see it in any local library. But I would say a big plug for if you're kind of struggling with it a bit, come into the Heritage Hub, because we have excellent volunteers, and they will, they were in the Family History Centre. They will actually sit with you and give you a bit of help and guidance. So it's well worth doing. And then we've got one more question from Carol, which says, "Are there any divorce records for around 1900-ish?"
Oh gosh. Now I know we've got some divorce records. I don't know quite what the dates are or what they
No.
where they cover. So the best thing to do, I know we haven't got a lot, but I think there's some there. Best thing to do in that case, drop us an email, archives@gloucestershire.gov.uk, and it will go into our inquiry system and we can have a look and advise you what we have, if we have anything, and how you can access it.
Wonderful. All that's left is just some thank yous from people, and saying how fascinating it was, which I concur. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's talk. Thank you as always to John Putley for doing such a great job, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you very much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you very much, everybody. Cheerio. Bye bye.